station at Indian Point in Westchester County.
Westinghouse had already built a small atomic plant at Indian Point. Now they applied to the AEC for a license to build a giant reactor on the same site. At the same time, General Electric proposed a massive plant just outside Chicago. The scientists on the Advisory Committee on Reactor Safeguards were worried that a core melt so close to large cities could cause a disaster. They drafted a letter to the chairman of the AEC, Glenn Seaborg, which would by law have to be published. It said they would only agree to the plants if the manufacturers redesigned all future reactors to stop a molten core escaping if an accident, however unlikely, occurred. Seaborg was an ardent proponent of large reactors.
We think that it will be possible to build huge nuclear power reactors that will produce electricity at the rate of millions of kilowatts and desalt seawater at the rate of hundreds of millions of gallons a day.
Seaborg asked for the letter not to be published. The impact on the industry might be serious, he said, and the public might misunderstand it. He and his fellow commissioners would deal with the problem in private.
All I can say is that we tried to take such steps as we could to follow their advice, to make the changes that would make them safe.
So what did you say to the manufacturers?
We had meetings with the manufacturers and discussed the issue with them. I think they were doing the best they could, and I don't know that we ever made a tremendous push to try to get them to change their whole manufacturing system.
Why not?
Oh, I think it was at that time not regarded as a feasible approach.
We asked General Electric to come in and discuss how they might cope with this, and in effect they came in and showed the problems that would arise with their containment and indicated they didn't think they wanted to continue selling power reactors if they were going to have to deal with the core melt problem. Westinghouse showed something called a core catcher, but no proof of how it would work. Neither company was anxious to deal with the problem, obviously.
Well, General Electric in effect threatening you. They're saying if you insist on this, then we'll just pull out of this.
It was a kind of threat, I think, yes.
What would have happened if you had said, I think these plants that are being built, these enormous plants by General Electric and Westinghouse, are potentially dangerous? What would have happened if you'd said that?
Well, that's a hypothetical question.
You had the power to do it. What would have happened?
I don't think we had the power to stop them. Well, we could have refused to license them, of course. But again, I think that in the context of the times, it's not a question that makes much sense.
Indian Point and the other reactors were built without the redesign the committee had asked for. Instead, the AEC ordered a massive upgrading of the capacity of the emergency cooling systems to prevent a core from ever melting. In effect, the manufacturers had got their way, but they had set a terrible trap for themselves. In contrast, in the Soviet Union, the grandiose nuclear plans of the 50s had remained on the drawing board. The Soviet planners were unconvinced they could be constructed cheaply. The physicists and engineers spent their days designing reactors that would not get built. Then, in the mid-60s, Brezhnev came to power. He believed that the road to communism lay through giant technological projects. The nuclear power program began again. It was dominated by Anatoly Alexandrov, a famous physicist who had designed what was known as the RBMK reactor. His team planned giant versions to be built around Soviet cities.
Я считал и считаю сейчас, что атомная энергетика чрезвычайно важна, потому что никакого топлива, ни газа, ни нефти, ну и в меньшей степени угля, но тоже не хватит для существования человечества даже в течение тысячелетия. Она чище, экологически чище всех остальных видов энергетики.
Вокруг атомных электростанций в Советском Союзе строились города и поселки. Это мы имеем в ряде случаев. Причем очень хорошо благоустроенные, сделанные по всем правилам науки вот такого типа. Правда, это здесь показан макет без садов, без скверов, без зелени. На самом деле они утопают в садах, в зелени, фонтаны.
This is a residential area located not far from the power plant in a picturesque wooded spot.
И мы такого рода станции создали, в частности, в таких местах, где вообще не было возможности жить.
The idyllic picture of a nuclear Eden masked a reality in which safety was barely even considered. The reactors were built at great speed to cut costs and to fulfill the Soviet plan. Some had no protective containment at all, despite the high pressures of steam. Large amounts of water, contaminated by radiation from the reactor core, were pumped into giant open ponds.
А потом решили строить уже крупные в 1 миллион киловатт. В 1973 году был построен первый блок, и вслед за ним следующий. Но поскольку я участвовал в этих работах, был на площадках, где строилось, то я видел, что в погоне за успехом как бы потеряли чувство меры.
Complete safety for the attending personnel is ensured at the atomic power plant. The slightest radioactive contamination can be detected with the aid of radiation monitors. At the exit of the washroom, there is a dosimetric installation. This will not let you out if there is the slightest trace of radioactivity about you.
При Брежневе началось активное разложение, воровство, пренебрежение к делу и так далее. И когда к концу 70-х годов эра Брежнева достигла своего апогея, это совпало с максимумом развития ядерной энергетики, и стало это просто все понятно, и это видели многие. Попытки как-то решить это дело путем служебных записок не имели значения. Нужна была публикация в крупном журнале.
Koryakhin and a fellow engineer wrote an article in the newspaper Communist. It openly challenged Alexandrov. It criticized the lack of safety in the design of the plants, where they were sited, and the growing question of what to do with the nuclear waste. It caused a sensation.
Была создана специальная пресс-конференция, где было сказано, что эта статья клеветническая, что это все не так, все это неправда, хотя это было уже многим ясно, так как вот это, вот, я бы сказал, научная мафия во главе с Александровым и Институтом атомной энергии, но она заняла удобное положение, потому что все награды, ордена, звания, поездки за границу и всякие, как у нас в России говорят, пироги и пышки доставались им, а синяки и шишки доставались простым инженерам в других институтах. Ну, это довольно широко бывает в жизни. Часто бывает в жизни.
Koryakhin was not completely alone. One other Soviet scientist spoke out against the headlong rush of the nuclear power program. He was Peter Kapitsa, who had worked with the legendary British physicist Rutherford in Cambridge in the 30s. In Disillusion, Kapitsa had written, "In 1938, the year that Rutherford died, there disappeared forever the happy days of free scientific work which gave such delight in our youth. Science has lost her freedom. Science has become a productive force. She has become rich, but she has become enslaved and veiled in secrecy. I do not know if Rutherford would continue to laugh and joke nowadays as he used to." Britain, meanwhile, struggled just to make her plants work.
So far, the first of the advanced gas-cooled reactors being built here on the Kent coast at Dungeness hasn't produced a single watt of electricity. Ordered at a cost of £80 million and due to be commissioned in 1972, it might just start producing electricity in 1977. And really, nobody has a clue how much it's going to cost us. So, why is it that things have gone wrong? For a start,
it is with pride that
when Calder Hall was opened, we were leading the world by 3 years. I can only feel terribly sad because I've seen that lead thrown away. I find it difficult to put it any other way.
We have to meet a date of 1980 for a new nuclear plant which must provide reliable power. And for that, we say the best chance of succeeding is to build the American PWR.
A nuclear generating plant is as harmless as a chocolate factory.
But a lot more nuclear power is needed. Nuclear power. The power to keep America turning on.
In America, the enormous nuclear plants ordered in the 60s were nearing completion. The engineers in charge were beginning to discover the trap they had set themselves by failing to redesign the containment. If a molten core could not be contained, then the emergency systems to prevent a meltdown would have to work, whatever happened. The engineers had to anticipate everything that could possibly go wrong. In the enormous complexity of the plants, this was proving impossible.
One of the main things we began to discover is that our theoretical calculations did not have a strong correlation with reality. While the regulations required emergency core cooling systems, pumps and valves, we didn't really have any basis for knowing that those pumps and valves would actually prevent a meltdown of the reactor. Because the degree of complexity of trying to predict what will happen inside a huge reactor in the midst of a pipe break, we couldn't make any judgments because we didn't have any facts on which to make judgments.
During the winter of 1971, a series of tests of emergency core cooling systems were performed at the AEC's private testing site in Idaho. Accidents were simulated in a small model of a reactor. In each case, the emergency systems worked, but the water failed to fill the core. Often it was forced out under pressure. Despite this, both the industry and senior members of the AEC argued that the full-size safety systems were safe enough.
I think what happened was the federal government and the nuclear industry decided that the absence of proof of danger was almost as good as proof of safety. In other words, even though we had done experiments that cast doubt on whether the safety systems would actually work if we had an accident, we still had that backup that, well, maybe an accident won't happen while we continue to work to perfect the design of the emergency system. Now, we couldn't announce to the public that we, having told the public that the plants were safe, we now had to disclose to them we were wrong, and then the fact that all these safety systems we told you about, actually they might not do any good. My goodness, the uproar would have been, we all probably would have been fired. That would have been the end of this wonderful technology from the standpoint of us. And we just couldn't admit that we had been wrong. And plus, of course, you understand with this one experiment, it didn't prove that the emergency systems wouldn't work in all circumstances.
In the early days, everything seemed predictable, reliable, technologically solvable. Everything had a technical answer to it. One of the primary reasons for me changing my view was an accident you would never have figured could happen. It was an accident started by a candle and lighting a candle, using a candle for viewing an area, which caught some of the material that he was trying to examine on fire, and that fire engulfed many of the safety systems through their cabling and wiring,
and systems were being turned off that were not expected to be turned off. Systems were being actuated by shorting one wire against another, and by doing that rendered almost all of the safety systems inoperable. This is something we never would have agreed could happen in advance. You have prescribed accidents you design for. You have certain other eventualities you include. Maybe this will happen also, so we'll take care of that accident too. But you would never have predicted that first you would be involved with that kind of flammable sealant, that the candle would light this fire, and that it would engulf that many of your primary safety systems for the plant.
And this was a plant that you had designed?
This was one that I had contributed to the design of those phases of it.
What would have happened if you'd said these things we are building are not safe?
Well, I did say it, but as long as I said it inside the agency, it was okay, because the public never knew about it. So I hired an attorney to advise me legally what would happen to me if a plant I had written an evaluation on and said it didn't meet the regulations subsequently had an accident. The legal answer was I had no responsibility for what the government did as long as I did my best technical work. And so I contented myself for at least 6 years of writing what I believed to be an accurate technical assessment and not worry myself the fact that that never got published.
I declare, with all these atomic plants going up everywhere, I wonder if a girl's even safe in her own home. I just hope they know what they're doing. Who's lead?
Forward. What is your principal concern right at this minute? Well, my principal concern is that we got an accident that we never been designed to accommodate.
On March the 28th, 1979, a series of human and mechanical errors at the 3 Mile Island plant exposed the core. It reacted with steam and produced hydrogen, which exploded. None of the emergency teams could understand what was going on inside the reactor. Then suddenly, this helicopter detected a large radioactive cloud drifting towards the nearest town. The voices of the commissioners in charge of the disaster were recorded by a dictaphone that had been left running on a table.
What was your time scale involved there? Hours. Hours before what? Before you had a core melt. Before you had a core melt? You would have hours till when you were generating fission products in a core melt kind of situation through the containment. I think, we got the best we got, Joe. And they're not coming up with answers. We got the... Well, don't you think as a precautionary measure there should be some evacuation?
Probably, but I must say it's operating totally in the blind, and I don't have any confidence at all that if we order evacuation, we won't move people from a place where they've already gotten a piece of the dose they're going to get into an area where they will get, another piece. They will have had 0.5 of what they were going to get, and now they move someplace else and get 1.0. Good. Now, Joe?
Yes, sir.
It seems to me I've got to call the governor.
Yes, sir, I do. I think you've got to talk to him immediately.
Do it immediately. We're operating almost totally in the blind. His information is ambiguous. Mine is non-existent. I don't know, a couple of blind men now have to stagger around and make a decision here.
Don't we know that it's been stopped? For instance, we just lost all communication with the control room.
For 4 days, the engineers at the plant watched helplessly as a bubble of hydrogen grew inside the damaged reactor. What they feared most was a further massive explosion. But they knew that if they tried to force the bubble out of the reactor, it might move downwards and completely uncover the core. They would then face the nightmare of a meltdown. The engineers were trapped by the consequences of an accident no one could have anticipated. It was a point they made to the commissioners again and again during the incident.
It's a failure mode that's never been studied. It's unbelievable.
Well, the thing that impressed me was how little we really knew about the situation. It was very hard to figure out what was happening. There was a lot of confusion on everyone's part, both on the company's part, the government's part, and a lot of other people who were participating. And I think this had a very strong effect on the public. Basically, to see all the men in the white suits or white lab coats who were supposed to know on TV basically scratching their heads, made a lot of people wonder whether things were as much under control as they had been told.
Did it make you wonder as well?
I think it made us all wonder, yes.
After the nuclear accident at 3 Mile Island, the President's Commission estimated the cost of the accident could reach $1.8 billion. That's a lot of money to pay for a power plant that may never work again. But 3 Mile Island wasn't the first nuclear accident, and it won't be the last. In 1979 alone, there were 20 nuclear incidents that could have led to the catastrophic meltdown of an American nuclear power plant. Don't get sold on nuclear power. We can't pay the price.
Their energy policy will benefit the nuclear industry and the oil companies, and they have given only lip service to the solar industry.
There were protests against nuclear power throughout the world. In the public's imagination, it was transformed from something good to something bad. Much of the anger was turned on the nuclear scientists. It emerged that they had deliberately concealed many of the risks and uncertainties they had discovered at the very time when they were publicly promoting the wonders of nuclear power.
We would, in effect, have solved the energy problem forever, permanently, which in itself is just an extraordinary new dimension in human experience, to have energy, which is the ultimate raw material.
We recognized that there was a risk, but we always deemed the risk to be really acceptable. But now I guess I'm more mature, older. I realize that the decision of what is acceptable is not something that we technologists can make. It's something that the public makes.
Why did you think it was something you could make then?
You know, I guess it never occurred to me to ask this question. The nuclear enterprise had always been, well, it started out as a secret enterprise, of course, and the notion of the public being intimately involved in very complicated technical issues which went way beyond the competence of any member of the public, it just didn't seem that that was the right way to do it. And I think the basic question is, can modern intrusive technology and liberal democracy coexist?
The power rises sharply. The rated power level is exceeded.
I keep in my safe records of the operator's telephone conversations on the eve of the accident. It makes one's skin crawl to read them. One operator telephones another and asks, the program here states what must be done, but a lot has been crossed out. The other thinks for a moment and then says, act according to what has been crossed out. In Kiev, we set off for the nuclear power station. It didn't enter my head that we were moving towards an event on a planetary scale. On the following day, when I went into the ruins of the reactor in an armored troop carrier, I had that sense of anger that there were no solutions, no technical remedies worked out in advance. Of course, we had said such an accident could only happen once in 1,000 years. But who said that this once would fall in our year 1986?
Это голос Валерия Легасова, академика, одного из моих героев моей повести «Чернобыль», человека необыкновенной и трагической судьбы, человека, с которым я встретился осенью 1986 года.
Legasov had been one of the main architects of Russia's nuclear program. Now he led the fight at Chernobyl, repeatedly flying through the radiation above the blazing reactor. As with 3 Mile Island, an improbable sequence of errors had led to an explosion and a molten core that had now started to burn its way through the foundations of the reactor. A tunnel was frantically dug directly under the plant by hundreds of volunteers. Liquid nitrogen was poured in to freeze the ground underneath. By luck, the nitrogen gas also began to stifle the graphite fire. And then on the 5th day, for reasons that still no one understands, the core began to cool. Despite this, throughout the disaster and the terrible dangers, Legasov remained a staunch defender of nuclear power.
The maximum dose was 0.7 roentgens per hour. Over the reactor, we got between 0.3 and 0.5 roentgens. Do you think we'll be able to have children? Yes, don't worry. Are you sure? I've been working with radioactivity since 1964, and I've got kids, don't worry.
In the months that followed, Legasov changed his mind. In a long taped interview with the then Soviet MP Yuri Sherbak, he gave a damning criticism of the whole nuclear power program. The problem, he said, was the demand that was made of the technology.
Удивительная была встреча наша с Легасовым, удивительный разговор. Он как-то очень доверительно, очень откровенно вдруг начал мне рассказывать все боли, все то, что он пережил в Чернобыле.
It's easy to think or imagine that the enemy is the nuclear reactor, but the enemy isn't technology. I have come to the paradoxical conclusion that technology must be protected from man. In the past, the time that includes the old reactors, the time that ended with Gagarin's flight into space, the technology was created by people who stood on the shoulders of Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. They were educated in the spirit of the great humanitarian ideas, in the spirit of a beautiful and correct moral sense. They had a clear political idea of the new society they were trying to create, one that would be the most advanced in the world. But already in the generations that succeeded them, there were engineers who stood on their shoulders and saw only the technical side of things. But if someone is educated only in technical ideas, they cannot create anything new, anything for which they are responsible. The operators of the reactor that night considered they were doing everything well and correctly, and they were breaking the rules for the sake of doing it even better. But they had lost sight of the purpose, what they were doing it for.
Then 2 years to the day after the accident, and for unknown reasons, Valery Legasov committed suicide.
Oh, this world is at a tremble with its strength and mighty power. They're sending up to heaven to get the brimstone fire. Take warning, my dear brother, be careful how you plan. You're working with the power of God's own holy hand. Atomic power was given by the mighty hand of God. Atomic power, it was given by the mighty hand of God.
In the golden age of science, at the time when society had its most optimistic view of science, it basically had a wrong-headed view of science. It had the view that this form of the technology was the inevitable form that it had to take, and that if that was the form it took, then it must be the right form. 40 years later, we have a similarly naive view. It's no longer tinged by hope and optimism, it's tinged by pessimism and fear. But we still have this view that society can't shape technology, that the form that the technology takes is the form we must accept. And just as it wasn't true in 1950, it's not true today. This is not a story of technology run amok, although that's how many people would understand it to be. The history of nuclear power is a history of political and economic and social decisions being made about a technology. And the key decisions weren't made by the technologists. They were done in the business realm. What science and technology gives you is a range of possibilities. And those possibilities can take you in any number of directions. It's potentially a liberating force. But to get there, society has to stop sleepwalking and start realizing that it's not a scientific choice, it's not an engineering choice, it's a moral choice.
Well, George, Does that answer your question?
It sure does. It's given me a whole new perspective.